Every case I've encountered has left its mark. Some are barely noticeable, like light scratches that heal quickly. Others are deep, scars that linger forever. This case I'm about to tell you about was just such a case. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up at night remembering that look in my eyes. The one full of fear and confidence at the same time. It started on one of those evenings that are perfect for mysteries. Rain drummed on the rooftops, the city was shrouded in darkness as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over it. I sat in my office. The wind was howling outside the window, and I was going through old photos from cases I'd managed to close. Silence in detective work is always deceptive. It's like the calm before the storm. And the storm was brewing. The phone rang. Maxfer, the voice on the other end, was sharp and tense. It was Captain Reed. "We need you to come to the Harrington mansion. There's been a murder here." Harrington Mansion. The name itself was legendary in our town. Harrington was a lawyer who could win cases that seemed impossible. But there was a shadow behind that success. He was disliked. He was feared. And he had more enemies than most people have friends. I threw on my coat, grabbed my old notebook, and set off for the place. When I arrived, the mansion greeted me with an eerie silence. The police had already cordoned off the grounds, the porch lights were shining brightly, and there she was, Grace. A young woman clutching a handkerchief. There was a bloodstain on it, and she looked at it as if she held her fate. "Who's that?" I asked Reed, coming closer. "She says she found the handkerchief next to the body," Reed sighed. But it looked like she had just signed her own verdict. I nodded and walked over to the girl. Her face was scared, but there was more to her eyes than that. "Did you find the handkerchief?" I asked. She nodded. "Then let's start with this." Grace sat across from me in the interrogation room. The dim light of the lamp emphasized her pale face. She was young, about 25 years old, no more. She looked like a simple, ordinary girl, but there was something about her story that made me suspicious. "Tell me what you were doing at Harrington's house," I asked, pretending to record her words. "I was passing by. I saw the door ajar. I thought I'd look in," she said quickly, as if she wanted to finish quickly. "And you just walked in? To the house of a lawyer, I understand you didn't know?" She nodded, but her hands were trembling slightly. "And what did you see?" "The body. He was lying on the floor, and there was a handkerchief beside him. I thought it might be important." "And that's why you took the evidence from the crime scene?" I didn't think." I leaned back in my chair, considering her. The words sounded plausible, but her reaction betrayed tension. "Did you know Harrington?" "No." The answer was too quick, and I sensed a lie. "Good." Sighs, "So you found the body, took the handkerchief, and what next?" She looked away. I was scared. "Scared of what?" She didn't answer. I wrote it down in my head as an important moment. To understand why this happened, I needed to learn more about Harrington. His name evoked different emotions: admiration, hatred, fear. But no one spoke of him indifferently. I headed for his office. His secretary, Miss Evelyn, greeted me with cold politeness. "Mr. Harrington was a busy man," she said. "He always had clients who would do anything for his services." "Did he have any enemies?" Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she answered. "Enemies? A man like him? Of course. But you do realize that enemies come in many forms." I nodded. "Had you noticed anything unusual in the last few days?" "He's been tense. I'd say even scared." "Why?" "I think someone was threatening him. I heard him on the phone, but I can't say for sure who." I left her thinking that someone might have decided to make the threats real. Back at the mansion, I discovered another detail: footprints in the carpet. They were barely visible, but clear enough to realize that someone else had been in the house. While I was thinking, Captain Reed came up to me. "We found the camera footage," he said. The tape showed the silhouette of a man in a long coat. He left the house a few minutes before Grace went inside. "Was it one of his clients?" I asked. "It could be. We have a list of those who have visited him recently." I decided that the next step was to find out who this person was. Who was behind it? The camera footage kept me on my toes. I studied the silhouette, trying to find any clue. The man was holding something in his hand. It was probably the same pen I'd found at the crime scene. I had rechecked the engraving on the pen. It read, "T.W." It could be Thomas Wells, a prominent businessman of questionable reputation. When I found Thomas, he was sitting in a bar, surrounded by dubious types like himself. "Maxfer," he said without turning around. "Why did I come here?" "A pen with your initials on it was found at the scene of Harrington's murder." He laughed. "Does that prove anything? What about the footage of you leaving the house a few minutes before Grace went in?" His smile disappeared. "I didn't kill him." "Yeah, I was there. I went to get my papers, but he was already dead." "What do you know about Grace?" "Grace?" His eyes changed. "She's the one who set this whole thing up, don't you understand? Thomas's interrogation gave me enough to get back to Grace." "Grace, did you know Harrington?" I asked. She was silent. "Had he blackmailed you?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes. He threatened me. Said he would ruin my life. I went to him to negotiate, but I found him dead." Her story sounded plausible, but one detail stuck out to me. How could she know where the handkerchief was if she hadn't been near the body before the murder? I decided to go through the security footage again. And there I noticed something that changed everything. The last frame showed another person. Ms. Evelyn. She entered the house an hour after the murder. When I questioned her, she confessed. "Harrington threatened me," she said. "He wanted to give away my secrets. I couldn't take it anymore." Ms. Evelyn's confession seemed like the perfect ending to this story. Her motive was simple: she feared Harrington would ruin her life. But something didn't add up. Confessions made under duress always have gaps. I asked her one last question. "Why did you return to the house an hour after the murder?" Her hands clenched into fists. I wanted to get my papers. Harrington kept copies of some letters that might have given me away." "What kind of letters?" "It's personal." Her voice was shaking. But I noticed she wasn't looking me in the eye. She knew more than she was saying. As they took her away, I wondered. It all looked too neat. But if Evelyn wasn't the killer, then who was? The next day, I watched the camera footage again. There was something strange about the way Evelyn had entered the house. Her movements were quick, but she was holding something in her hand. I zoomed in on the image. It was a key. A key that apparently she couldn't legally obtain. Someone had given it to her. I decided to go back into the house. As I entered Harrington's office, my gaze fell on that very pen again. It was too obvious a clue. I picked it up and examined it closely. There was a tiny mechanism inside. This was no ordinary pen. It could have been a miniature voice recorder. Shit, I exhaled. I hurried to the lab to see if the device had any recordings. A few hours later, a technician came back to me with the tape. "Here's a tape from the day of the murder," he said. When I turned on the tape, a chill ran down my spine. "You think you can threaten me?" A man's voice spoke. It was Harrington's. "You have no idea who you're messing with." The reply was quiet but feminine. "You have to stop, George. If you keep going, I'll tell you everything. That was Grace's voice. Grace. She lied to me. She knew Harrington. What's more, she threatened him. When I called her back in for questioning, she tried to look innocent. I've already told you everything, she said. No, not everything. I threw the tape recorder on the table. You were there when it happened. Her face went pale. I wasn't, she said, but her voice shook. Then why is your voice recorded on this device? She fell silent. You wanted him gone, didn't you? You knew he had you in his power. I didn't kill him, she finally said. Then who did? Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't me. It was Thomas. Thomas's name came up again. His connection to the case was obvious, but I still had no direct proof. I knew he was hiding something. I found him at the bar, just like last time. This time he was less sure of himself. Maxfer, you again? He began, trying to feign indifference. It's me again, Thomas. And I have news for you. I put the recorder on the table. You were there. You heard her threatening him. His eyes changed. What does that prove? It proves you took advantage of it. You knew she could be set up. His hands clenched into fists. Maxfer, you have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. You killed Harrington to get out of debt, and you decided to make her a scapegoat. He laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. You can't prove anything. But he was wrong. I've already proved everything. When I returned to Captain Reed, I was sure I was right. Thomas was the killer. His motives were clear and the evidence spoke for itself. We arrested him the next day. He tried to deny it until the last possible moment, but the evidence was too strong. Grace was released, but I still felt there was something wrong with her story. Maxfer, thank you for believing in me, she said as we said goodbye. Her words sounded sincere, but there was an ambiguity to them. A few weeks later, the case was officially closed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something. Grace had disappeared from town. No one knew where she'd gone. But one day, I found a letter on my desk. Thank you for everything. I hope you don't find out the whole truth. Her signature. As I held the letter in my hands, I had only one question: was she a victim, or had I missed something important? The truth is always multifaceted.